What if the very book that's supposed to bring you closer to God actually pushed you away from faith entirely? When you saw this video, you're probably wondering, what Bible verses could possibly be so disturbing that they'd make someone lose their faith? Maybe you're a believer who's never encountered these passages, or perhaps you're someone who's had your own doubts and you're looking for validation that you're not alone in questioning what you've been taught. The Bible claims to guide people toward morality, peace, and salvation. But hidden beneath those promises are verses that defy logic and strip away the comfort of faith. These aren't ancient rumors or forgotten customs. Whether created through outdated doctrine or revealed through careful study, these verses show just how far belief systems can go when examined honestly. Some target specific groups, others govern the most private parts of life, but all of them come from a place of religious authority, and all of them continue to affect real people around the world. Here are the Bible verses that made me stop believing in God. The more you hear, the worse it gets. Number 1. Divine command for total genocide. Let's start with 1 Samuel 15:3, where God commands Saul to attack the Amalekites. Now go and strike Amalek and devote to destruction all that they have. Do not spare them, but kill both man and woman, child and infant, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. This isn't just warfare, it's a divine order for complete genocide that specifically includes the murder of babies and infants. When you read those words carefully, you're looking at systematic extermination commanded by the God who supposedly embodies love and mercy. But here's where human psychology becomes fascinating and terrifying. Our brains are incredibly sophisticated at protecting us from information that threatens our core identity. It's called motivated reasoning, and it explains how someone can read about God ordering infanticide while still maintaining that this same deity is perfectly loving and just. We literally rewrite reality in our minds to preserve our existing beliefs, even when the evidence contradicts everything we've been taught. Number 2, complete annihilation of entire cities. But that's not an isolated incident. Deuteronomy 20:16-17 takes it even further. But in the cities of these peoples that the Lord your God is giving you for an inheritance, you shall save alive nothing that breathes, but you shall devote them to complete destruction. This passage commands the total annihilation of entire populations, including civilians who had nothing to do with any conflict. We're talking about divine orders to wipe out entire civilizations, leaving no survivors whatsoever. The psychological term for ignoring these contradictions is cognitive dissonance, and it's the reason millions of people can worship a God who, according to his own book, commanded multiple genocides. When faced with information that threatens our worldview, our brains engage in mental gymnastics that would make Olympic athletes jealous. We compartmentalize, rationalize, and explain away anything that challenges our core beliefs, because questioning them feels like psychological death. Number 3, mass murder of innocent children. Then we have Exodus 12:29, describing the final plague in Egypt. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt. Think about this carefully. God deliberately kills every firstborn child throughout an entire nation, including infants and toddlers who had absolutely nothing to do with Pharaoh's decisions. These children were completely innocent, yet they're slaughtered en masse because of their leader's stubbornness. This passage reveals something deeply troubling about the biblical conception of divine justice. According to this story, collective punishment that includes mass child murder is not only acceptable to God, but actively carried out by him. Yet somehow, believers manage to maintain that this same deity is the source of perfect love and morality. The mental gymnastics required to reconcile these contradictions is exhausting. Number 4, children mauled to death for name-calling. Perhaps one of the most shocking examples is 2 Kings 2:23-24. He went up from there to Bethel, and while he was going up on the way, some small boys came out of the city and jeered at him, saying, "Go up, you bald head! Go up, you bald head!" And he cursed them in the name of the Lord. And 2 she-bears came out of the woods and tore 42 of the boys. Read that again. 42 children are brutally mauled to death by bears because they called a prophet bald. The punishment doesn't just not fit the crime, it's so disproportionate that it borders on the psychotic. These were kids engaging in typical childhood teasing, and God's response is to have them torn apart by wild animals. If any human being did something like this today, we'd recognize them as a dangerous psychopath. Number 5. God threatens cannibalism as punishment. Leviticus 26:29 shows us another disturbing side of divine love. You shall eat the flesh of your sons, and you shall eat the flesh of your daughters. This is God threatening to make people so desperate during his judgment that they'll resort to cannibalism, eating their own children. Let that sink in for a moment. The supposed source of all morality is threatening to drive people to such extreme desperation that they'll consume their own offspring. This reveals something crucial about how our minds process religious texts. We've been conditioned to see anything God does or commands as automatically moral, simply because it comes from God. This is called the divine command theory, and it's a form of circular reasoning that prevents us from applying our normal moral intuitions to biblical passages. When we step back and evaluate these actions by any reasonable ethical standard, they become indefensible. Number 6. Celebrating infant murder. Psalm 137:9 contains perhaps the most chilling celebration of violence in the entire Bible. Blessed shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock. This isn't just describing violence. It's calling the person who smashes babies against rocks blessed. It's presenting infant murder as something worthy of divine approval and human celebration. The psychological mechanism that allows people to read this verse without losing their faith is called compartmentalization. It's the same mental process that allows someone to love their family while working for a morally questionable corporation. We separate different aspects of our beliefs into isolated mental compartments so they don't have to interact with each other. This way, we can maintain our faith in a loving God while simultaneously reading about that same God blessing those who murder children. Number 7. Sexual slavery commanded by Moses. Numbers 31:17-18 presents us with perhaps the most morally repugnant passage in the entire Bible. Now therefore, kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman who has known man by lying with him. But all the young girls who have not known man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. This is Moses speaking for God, commanding systematic sexual slavery after ordering the murder of children and non-virgin women. There's no amount of theological interpretation that can make this passage morally acceptable. We're looking at explicit instructions for war crimes that would be prosecuted at The Hague today. Yet this same Moses is revered as one of the greatest prophets in human history, and the God who supposedly gave him these commands is worshipped by billions as the source of perfect love and justice. Number 8. Jesus demands you hate your family. Even Jesus, supposedly the embodiment of divine love, says things that are deeply troubling when examined closely. Luke 14:26 records him saying, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple." This is Jesus explicitly demanding that his followers hate their families. Now, Christian apologists will tell you this is hyperbole, or that hate doesn't really mean hate in this context. But notice how we only apply this interpretive charity to religious texts. If any other leader demanded that followers hate their families to join their movement, we'd immediately recognize it as the behavior of a dangerous cult leader. Yet when Jesus says it, we bend over backwards to explain it away. Number 9. Eternal torture for finite crimes. Revelation 14:10-11 describes the fate of non-believers. He also will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger, and he will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever, and they have no rest, day or night. This is a description of eternal torture, with no possibility of reprieve, no matter how minor the person's earthly sins might have been. Think about the moral implications of this. According to Christian doctrine, someone who lives a relatively good life but simply doesn't believe the right religious claims will be tortured forever in ways that make the worst human torturers look merciful by comparison. Meanwhile, a serial killer who accepts Jesus on his deathbed gets to spend eternity in paradise. This isn't justice by any reasonable definition. It's cosmic totalitarianism. Number 10. God regrets creating humanity. Finally, we have Genesis 6:5-7, where God surveys his creation and decides it was all a mistake. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. So the Lord said, I will blot out man whom I have created from the face of the land. This passage reveals a God who is either not omniscient, since he apparently didn't foresee how humanity would turn out, or not omnibenevolent, since he created beings he knew would become evil, and then punished them for becoming exactly what he made them to be. Either way, it contradicts the fundamental attributes that theologians claim define God's nature. The psychological defense mechanism at work here is called belief perseverance, and it explains why people can maintain their faith even when presented with overwhelming contradictory evidence. Once someone has invested their identity, relationships, and sense of meaning in a particular belief system, abandoning it feels like psychological death. So instead, they rationalize, compartmentalize, and explain away anything that threatens their core convictions. When this psychological defense system breaks down, the experience can be jarring. It's like suddenly recognizing that the loving God you've been taught about is, according to his own book, a genocidal tyrant who endorsed rape, slavery, child murder, and eternal torture for thought crimes. The cognitive dissonance becomes too great to sustain, and faith simply implodes under the weight of its own contradictions. The verses we've examined today aren't cherry-picked examples taken out of context. They're representative of a consistent pattern throughout Scripture that reveals a deity whose character is fundamentally incompatible with modern moral understanding. And while believers have developed sophisticated theological frameworks to explain away these passages, the simpler explanation is often the correct one. These texts were written by ancient people who reflected the moral limitations and cultural biases of their time, not by an all-knowing, perfectly loving God. For many people, a faith crisis isn't really about losing God, it's about finding themselves. It's about finally having the courage to acknowledge what they've been unconsciously suppressing and allowing their moral intuitions to guide them toward truth rather than conformity. The Bible verses that challenge faith can also free people from the exhausting mental gymnastics required to maintain belief in something that contradicts their deepest sense of right and wrong. But here's what's truly fascinating about human psychology. Even after losing faith, people often find themselves grieving not just the loss of their beliefs, but the loss of their ability to believe. There's something profoundly comforting about having ultimate answers, about believing that someone infinitely wise and powerful is in control of the chaos. Letting go of that security blanket is terrifying, even when you intellectually recognize that it was based on flawed premises. This is why deconversion is often such a traumatic process. It's not just about changing your mind about theology. It's about reconstructing your entire identity and worldview from the ground up. Everything you thought you knew about morality, purpose, and meaning suddenly becomes questionable. It's like discovering that the foundation of your house is built on quicksand and having to rebuild while still living inside. If you've made it this far, you're probably experiencing some form of cognitive dissonance yourself. Maybe these verses are new to you, or maybe you've been struggling with similar questions for years, but never had the courage to voice them. Here's what I want you to do right now. Don't let fear make this decision for you. If something in this video resonated with you, if you felt that uncomfortable recognition of truth, then you owe it to yourself to keep digging. Subscribe to this channel because we're going to continue exploring these difficult questions together. And hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next video. The comment section is going to be intense, but I want to hear your story. Share your thoughts, your struggles, your questions, because breaking free from intellectual bondage starts with honest conversation. Your future self will thank you for having the courage to seek truth over comfort.